In the last 12 months, whatever faith was remaining of the international rules-based order has been systematically destroyed. The horror of seeing children burned alive while sheltering in hospitals, rows of corpses sprawled out in bombed-out schools, and the destruction of 70% of all civilian infrastructure in Gaza has brought global awareness of Israel's systematic violations of international law, ranging from prohibitions on collective punishment, starvation as a method of warfare, ethnic cleansing, unlawful occupation, apartheid, and genocide, the crime of all crimes. But it is not just Israel committing these crimes. We've also been aware of the complicity of Western governments that have continued to provide financial, diplomatic, and military support while these crimes are committed. Our awareness of these horrors has not come about because of journalistic freedom, but despite decades of journalistic repression. For generations, Western media narratives have aimed to shape public opinion on the relationship between Israel and Palestine by systematically dehumanizing Palestinian lives. In November 2023, 8 UK-based journalists working for the BBC wrote a letter accusing it of being, quote, guilty of double standards in how civilians are seen, end quote. The letter stated that, quote, the BBC has failed to accurately tell this story through omission and lack of critical engagement with Israel's claims, and it has therefore failed to help the public engage with and understand the human rights abuses unfolding in Gaza, end quote. Just this month, 10 journalists who covered the war on Gaza for two of the world's leading news networks, CNN and BBC, revealed the inner workings of those newsrooms from October 7th onwards, alleging pro-Israel bias in coverage, systematic double standards, including prohibitions on using the words genocide and apartheid, and frequent violations of journalistic principles. This effort to dehumanize Palestinians is decades old. Throughout previous bombing campaigns in Gaza, the value of life placed on a Palestinian has always been a fraction of that placed on an Israeli, and the instigators of violence have always been portrayed as Palestinians driven by fundamentalism. These narratives have aimed to obscure the truth and prevent audiences from understanding Israel as a settler colonial state, unlawfully occupying Palestinian land, forcibly relocating indigenous people, and subjecting them to a vast network of checkpoints under the shadow of an apartheid wall. The effort to prevent journalistic coverage has been guided by government policy in the USA and Israel. In 1988, during the First Intifada, when Palestinians organised peaceful protests against the long-standing occupation of their land through boycotts and refusal to work, they were met with a brutal response from the occupying power, including mass arrests, arbitrary detention, and violent repression of those protesting. During this time, a photo emerged of a 17-year-old boy with a stone in his hand, being beaten by two Israeli soldiers, with one of them breaking the boy's arm with the back of a rifle. This image appeared in the US press, who were alarmed by the egregious power disparity between the armed soldiers beating this boy into submission and the now popularized depiction of the Palestinians as children with stones versus Israeli soldiers with tanks was born. In January of that year, Henry Kissinger held an audience with leading figures of the Israeli lobby in the United States, and a memorandum of that meeting was leaked. What he says in that meeting is extremely telling, because his chief concern was not that Israel was committing these brutalities, but frustration at the fact that it had been revealed. He urges Israeli leaders to, quote, throw out the press and ban television from the trouble spots a la South Africa, referring to the repression of journalistic freedom under the apartheid South African regime in the 1980s. And he also suggests that the Israeli army should be sent to put down the insurrection, quote, overwhelmingly, brutally and rapidly, end quote. So in the face of peaceful resistance from Palestinian people during the First Intifada, seeking to achieve their right to self-determination and live free from unlawful occupation, the response was to ensure that the press don't cover the story and be ready to shoot those involved. In 2022, this is what they did to Shireen Abu Akleh. While reporting on an Israeli military raid in the West Bank of city of Jenin, Shireen was shot and killed by an Israeli sniper. She was a Palestinian-American journalist who worked for Al Jazeera for over 25 years and was a deeply respected voice in the struggles faced by Palestinians. Despite wearing a press vest and helmet, clearly identifying her as a journalist. Eyewitnesses and multiple investigations, including one by the United Nations, indicated that she was shot by Israeli forces. This targeting and killing of journalists and reporting on the atrocities committed by Israel has been a hallmark of the current genocide. In the last year, there have been over 130 journalists killed, the highest number in any modern conflict, with Israel preventing reporters from entering Gaza and even closing down entire TV stations in Israel and the occupied West Bank. Why is Israel doing this? Jonathan Dager, head of the Reporters Without Borders Middle East desks, explained, "If there are no journalists, there's no one who can independently verify and tell the world that then the Israeli army becomes the source of information." End quote. The goal is to remove the storytellers and deny the truth. This repression of journalism is not limited to those reporting from the ground, but also to those reporting from around the world. Over the last few months, the UK government has been engaging in alarming and intensified levels of repression against activists, including artists, journalists and academics. To give a few examples, on the morning of the 16th of October, counter-terrorism police in Glasgow Airport detained journalist, whistleblower, human rights campaigner and former British diplomat Craig Murray upon his return from Iceland. In August 2024, freelance journalist Richard Medhurst was detained and questioned by police at Heathrow Airport. Medhurst said he believed he was targeted for speaking out on the situation in Palestine and in fact spoke at the UN here in Geneva recently about the detention. Just a few weeks later, another journalist and activist, Sarah Wilkinson, saw her home raided in the early hours of the morning. Personal items were confiscated, but to date, she has not been charged. This week, 10 counter-terrorism police officers raided the London home of the prominent journalist Asa Winstanley, who eventually was neither arrested nor charged with any offence, but his electronic devices were confiscated by the police. And this month, the General Secretaries of the UK's National Union of Journalists and the International Federation of Journalists wrote to the head of counter-terrorism policing in the UK to raise concerns about the use of counter-terrorism powers against journalists covering Gaza. So while Israel kills journalists reporting on the ground in Gaza, Western governments silence, repress and criminalise those reporting on this reality. This repression is part of a strategy and silencing dissent to hide the ongoing slaughter in Gaza and now Lebanon from public view. Yet this intimidation has not diminished the courage of journalists in Palestine and around the world from reporting the truth. While Israel is committed to preventing accountability for their actions, fearless journalism has ensured that reality is exposed. The coverage has not only informed the public, but also the UN and international legal mechanisms to hold the perpetrators to account. Israel is being investigated for genocide at the ICJ, and at the initial hearing in February, the legal teams were able to rely on detailed reports and footage of violations by journalists to demonstrate the commission of genocide at the ICJ. In the investigation conducted by the International Criminal Court, the UN Commission of Inquiry submitted 7,000 pieces of evidence collected by journalists to show evidence of war crimes, including extermination of a civilian population. Due to this work, it has been established by the highest court in the world that Israel is an unlawful occupying power committing apartheid, and the UN Secretary and the UN General Assembly has voted to end arms trade and demand the evacuation of Israelis from occupied Palestinian territory. The title of my talk here is on effective measures to counter the repression of journalists. My answer to this is to keep on telling the truth. Do not be intimidated or silenced using the words apartheid or genocide, and be clear that Israel is conducting extermination of the Palestinian people. You may face intimidation in doing so, but your voice is needed to protect the lives and legacies of all those journalists who have already been killed for telling us the truth. The reality is that the years of repression of accurate reporting on Palestine is finally crumbling. As Arundhati Roy said, the winner of the Booker Prize, no propaganda on earth can hide the wound that is Palestine. We have all been witness to the horror, and unless we speak out, our silence becomes complicity. Thank you.